Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. The Rejection ***. On the distant planet of Veros, a society of fiercely proud and formidable alien beings ruled, led by the most powerful monarch in the galaxy, Princess Lyri. She was known across the stars for her unmatched beauty, intelligence, and strength. Yet, despite her many suitors, Lyri had rejected them all. The galaxy's most powerful warriors, noble bloodlines, and influential leaders had all tried and failed to earn her favor. For Lyri, none were worthy. The royal palace was an intricate structure of shifting glass and alien metals, sitting high above the capital city on a plateau surrounded by vast alien forests and shimmering lakes. The princess stood on a balcony overlooking the horizon, her long silver hair billowing in the wind. Her eyes, a deep violet, were locked on the setting twin suns as though searching for something far beyond the horizon. In the great hall below, her council and her father, King Malroth, gathered to discuss an impending alliance. The Galactic Federation had requested a union with the Verosjan Empire, offering the hand of one of their greatest warriors to Princess Lyri. Despite their high-ranking intentions, they were unaware of her disdain for the men who had previously courted her. "You must choose, my daughter," King Malrotha's voice echoed through her thoughts. "Our kingdom's future hinges on this. The Federation is powerful, and their alliances could help us maintain peace." Lyri's lips pressed together in a tight line. "I will choose no one." "Not yet," she replied firmly. "None of these males are worthy of me." Her father's brow furrowed. "That is your pride speaking, Lyri. It will cost us everything. The universe respects strength. A king's daughter must not appear weak. I will not marry for the sake of politics, father. You should know that." Her voice was steady, but beneath it lay an undercurrent of frustration. The constant parade of suitors, all seeking her hand for their own gain, had worn her down. King Malrotha's eyes softened, but he stood his ground. "Then do it for the future of the Verosjan people." Lyri turned sharply from the balcony, her regal cloak flowing behind her as she stalked back inside the palace. The court was no place for her. She had grown weary of the endless meetings, of the endless proposals from beings who were nothing more than a means to an end. She wasn't a prize to be won. As she entered her chambers, the sound of the doors sliding shut behind her brought her a small measure of relief. The room was dark, save for the soft glow of her holographic map. Lyri stood before it, her gaze distant, her mind racing with the weight of the expectations thrust upon her. She didn't want to be like the others. The princess was not to be courted for political gain, not to be wed to secure an alliance. She had heard the whispers of male warriors across the stars, arrogant, confident, expecting her to fall at their feet as though their strength alone could win her heart. In a ship drifting silently through the void, Commander Jackson Drake sat at the helm of his vessel. A warrior forged in the heat of countless battles, Jackson had earned his place as one of the Federation's finest soldiers. But his mind wasn't on his missions or his next war. His thoughts were consumed with something else. Princess Lyri. He had been briefed on the princess's disdain for suitors, and yet something about her piqued his interest. Was it the challenge? The mystery? Or was it the idea that perhaps, just perhaps, a human like him might be able to do what none of her own kind had managed? Win her favor. His reputation had spread far and wide across the galaxy, and while many feared him, none were quite as eager to test his skills as Princess Lyri. She was a challenge in a way no enemy had ever been, and for Jackson, that was enough of a reason to pursue her. He had trained his entire life to be more than just a soldier. His physical prowess was legendary, yes, but his true strength lay in his mind. His ability to read people, to understand them in ways others couldn't. And Lyri, despite all her rejections, intrigued him more than any other being he had ever encountered. Back on Veros, Princess Lyri's chambers grew colder as the hours passed, her thoughts restless. She needed something more than just politics and power, she needed someone who could match her. But would such a person even exist? The doors to her room slid open unexpectedly, and she turned to find a figure standing in the doorway. Her eyes narrowed, sensing the presence immediately. He was human. No one else had the scent of a warrior quite like his. "I've heard much about you, Princess Lyri." Jackson's voice was smooth, confident, but there was a hint of challenge in it. He had made it through the palace's defenses, walked past every guard, and found his way into the presence of the princess herself. Lyri's eyes flickered with surprise. "And who are you to think you can walk into my chambers uninvited?" The moment he spoke, Lyri felt the heat of his words stir something within her, a primal urge that she had never allowed herself to feel before. She had never wanted a man like this, yet something in his presence awakened a long-buried desire. The challenge was clear. Jackson Drake was here not to please her, not to win her with gifts or empty words. He had come to prove something, to show her that, perhaps, he was the one male worthy of her attention. And that thought, above all, made her pulse quicken. The warrior's challenge ***. Leary studied the human warrior before her with sharp eyes, his posture confident yet relaxed, as if he knew he was already in control of the situation. His dark brown hair was cropped short, and his piercing blue eyes seemed to gleam with something far more dangerous than mere arrogance. He was unlike any of the other suitors who had tried to win her favor. The others had flattered her, promised her wealth, power, or prestige, but Jackson Drake was different. There was something raw and untamed about him that both disturbed and intrigued her. "I didn't invite you in, human," she said, her voice cool and commanding. "You've broken every protocol, every law, just to stand here in front of me. What makes you think you have the right to challenge me?" Jackson's smile didn't falter. He stepped forward slowly, his boots making no sound on the polished floor. He was aware of the distance between them, yet he didn't seem to mind it. His eyes, however, never left hers. "I don't need an invitation, princess. I'm here because I've heard that none of the galaxy's greatest warriors could ever impress you. So, I thought I'd give it a try." Leary's violet eyes narrowed, her posture straightening as she sized him up. Her mind raced, torn between amusement and an undeniable curiosity. She could feel the surge of adrenaline beginning to pulse through her, the challenge hanging in the air between them. "You think you can impress me?" she asked, her voice sharp. "What makes you so special, Commander Drake? What can a mere human do that my own kind couldn't?" Jackson didn't flinch. "I'm not here to impress you, princess. I'm here to show you what a real warrior looks like. I've spent my life in battle, facing enemies that would make the strongest Verashtian warriors tremble. And I don't back down. Ever." Leary's lips curled into a slight smirk. She crossed her arms, studying him with a look that could freeze any lesser being in their tracks. "You're bold for a human. But you forget one thing, I don't bow to anyone. And that's exactly why I'm here," Jackson said, his tone unwavering. "You don't bow to anyone and I don't need you to. But I think for once you'll want to see what I'm capable of. I'm not offering you anything else. No politics, no titles, no empty promises. Just a fight. To prove myself worthy of your time." Leary raised an eyebrow, her curiosity now piqued. "A fight?" she repeated, her voice a low hum of disbelief. "You want to challenge me in my own palace?" "I'm not challenging you for dominance, princess," Jackson explained, his voice steady. "I'm challenging you for respect. The kind of respect earned only by strength. Strength that's forged through experience, not by lineage or titles." Leary's eyes glinted with the spark of recognition. She had heard of his feats, of his daring raids against warlords, his victories in the most brutal arenas across the galaxy, and of his reputation for facing impossible odds and emerging victorious. But none of it had ever been personal before. She had only viewed him as another name among the stars, another warrior to dismiss. But standing in front of him, with his defiance and quiet confidence, she found herself caught between disdain and a deep, unsettling intrigue. "You think I haven't faced true warriors before?" Leary asked, her voice low and filled with authority. "You think I haven't tested my own strength? You think you're the first to think they could impress me with their so-called abilities?" Jackson stepped closer, now standing just a few feet away. He didn't flinch as her gaze bore into him, and his tone softened ever so slightly. "I don't think you've met anyone like me, princess. And I'm not asking you to kneel. I'm asking you to see me for who I am. Not some pawn, not some tool for your politics. Just a warrior who's earned his place." The silence in the room stretched, both of them standing in a tense standoff. Leary's heart began to beat faster, the pulse of anticipation flowing through her veins. The challenge had been laid before her, and for the first time in a long while, she found herself considering it seriously. What would it be like to fight him? To face a human warrior with nothing to lose, someone who wasn't trying to win her for any reason other than the pure desire to prove himself? She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached for the gauntlet resting on her table, her fingers grazing the sleek alien design. The gauntlet was a symbol of her power, an artifact passed down through generations of Verashtian royalty. When she donned it, she felt her true strength coursing through her, the power of her ancestors awakening in her. "You want to fight, Commander?" Leary finally said, her voice no longer holding the same icy edge. "Then prepare yourself. But know this, you'll find no mercy from me. Jackson smiled, that same confident grin that had never once faltered since he stepped into the room. "I wouldn't expect it, Princess. I wouldn't have it any other way." Lyri's eyes flickered for a moment, a brief hesitation passing through her mind. But then it was gone, replaced by the familiar rush of battle lust. She stood tall, the air in the room thick with tension as she activated the gauntlet. A shimmering energy field enveloped her arm, crackling with power. The hum of it filled the silence, a clear signal that she was ready for whatever Jackson had to offer. Without another word, she lunged at him, her movements a blur of grace and deadly precision. She was faster than most and stronger than any human, but she wanted to see what Jackson was made of. Would he meet her speed with his own, or would he falter beneath the pressure? Jackson, however, was ready. He sidestepped her strike with uncanny agility, his reflexes sharp. The moment she missed, he countered, launching himself toward her with surprising speed. His fist, solid and unrelenting, collided with her side, sending a jolt of shock through her body. It wasn't a blow of sheer strength. No, Jackson knew how to use leverage, how to make every strike count. Lyri barely had time to react, but her instincts kicked in. She twisted mid-air, landing gracefully on her feet and turning to face him. She smiled, she couldn't help it. This was the challenge she had been waiting for, the thrill she had longed for. Jackson Drake wasn't like the others. He didn't cower, didn't hold back. He fought with everything he had, and for the first time in a long time, Lyri realized that this human might just be the one to truly challenge her. She wasn't going to make it easy for him, though. As he charged again, she parried his blow and launched a counterattack with her own. The clash of their movements was a dance of power and precision, each of them testing the other's limits. The dance of warriors ***. The battle between Princess Lyri and Commander Jackson Drake was like nothing either had ever experienced. It wasn't just a contest of strength, it was a test of willpower, of resilience, and of raw, untamed skill. Each movement they made was a statement, an affirmation of their identities, their abilities, their very essence. The air crackled with energy as their bodies collided in a blur of motion, each strike landing with the force of a storm. Lyri's gauntlet shimmered with every punch she threw, her violet eyes alight with the thrill of combat. She was fast, faster than Jackson had anticipated, her reflexes honed by years of training and the legacy of her people. But Jackson was no slouch. His years as a commander, as a soldier who had faced the fiercest enemies in the galaxy, had taught him to read his opponent, to anticipate their movements. His strategy wasn't just strength, it was precision, timing, and an unyielding will to win. Their fists met in the center of the room with a thunderous crash, sending shockwaves through the space. Lyri staggered slightly but recovered instantly, her eyes narrowing with the growing understanding of her opponent. She had underestimated him at first, thinking him just another human, just another warrior eager to prove himself. But now, with the sweat dripping from her brow and her heart pounding, she saw the truth. Jackson wasn't just strong. He wasn't just skilled. He had something else, something raw, something untamable. A human standing here, holding his own against the mighty Princess of Veros. For a brief moment, Lyri felt a flicker of something unfamiliar stir within her. Respect. It was the last thing she had expected to feel in this battle, and yet it was undeniable. She had faced the best her people had to offer, the strongest warriors in the galaxy, but none had made her feel this alive. None had made her realize how far she could push herself. She leaped backward, her cloak billowing behind her, and with a speed that defied gravity, she launched herself at Jackson again. But this time her attack was different. She didn't just strike with the intent to hurt, she struck with the intent to break through him, to find the crack in his defense, the flaw in his precision. Her gauntlet's energy flared as she twisted her body mid-air, her fist aimed directly at his chest. Jackson's eyes widened, his instincts kicking in as he moved to dodge, but Lyri was already there. The force of her blow struck him square in the chest, sending him flying backward, crashing into one of the palace's ornate columns. The sound of impact echoed through the chamber, and for a moment, everything fell silent. Lyri stood still, her breath coming in short gasps, watching the spot where Jackson had fallen. Was that the end of it? Had she broken him? But then from the debris she saw movement. Jackson rose slowly, dusting himself off, his blue eyes flashing with something even more intense than before. "You're good," he said, his voice strained but steady. He had taken the full brunt of her attack, but his grin never wavered. "I'll give you that, Princess." Lyri's heart pounded. She had expected him to stay down. She had expected him to crumble under her power. But here he was, standing again, even more determined than before. "That's not how it ends," Leary responded, her voice cool but laced with a challenge. Not until one of us proves we're the better fighter. She had never been more certain of her own strength, but now, facing Jackson, she had the sense that she was standing at the edge of something new, something far beyond mere strength. Jackson wasn't here to be beaten. He was here to show her something else. He wasn't looking for her approval, for her affection, or for her respect. He was fighting to show her that, in the end, it wasn't titles or royal bloodlines that determined who was truly strong. It was the heart, the will to rise again no matter how many times you were knocked down. Jackson didn't give her the time to think further. He rushed forward, his movements sharp and precise. Leary barely had time to react, raising her gauntlet to block his strike, but his fist collided with her forearm with a force that made her teeth rattle. She wasn't used to this relentless aggression from someone who didn't care for politics or posturing. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was trying to survive, to win. She countered, spinning and delivering a swift knee to his abdomen, but Jackson was already ducking, rolling to the side to avoid the full impact. His speed was his greatest asset, his ability to read her movements, to predict her next strike before she even made it. For the first time in their battle, Leary realized that she couldn't rely solely on her superior strength. She would have to fight smarter. Jackson was on her again, and this time she knew she had to act fast. He swung a low kick aimed at her legs, trying to unbalance her, but Leary was too quick. She leaped, landing effortlessly on a raised platform, gaining the high ground. She had the advantage now. Jackson looked up, narrowing his eyes as he calculated his next move. There was no fear in his gaze, no hesitation. He would continue the fight until one of them claimed victory. Leary admired that more than she cared to admit. She held out her hand, her gauntlet crackling with energy. "Come at me, human," she said, her voice daring, almost teasing. "Show me your strength." Jackson didn't need to be told twice. He surged forward, faster than Leary had anticipated, his body a blur of motion. But this time Leary was ready. She dropped low, using her superior agility to avoid his attack, and landed behind him in one fluid motion. With her gauntlet raised, she struck with incredible force, her fist connecting with his back. Jackson grunted in pain but managed to twist in midair, using the momentum to launch himself backward, away from her. They both paused for a moment, panting, sweat streaking down their faces. The silence between them was thick, the tension palpable. The fight was no longer just a contest. It had become a mutual recognition of each other's abilities. Jackson straightened, rubbing his back where she had struck him. His eyes met hers, and for the first time in their battle, he saw something different in her gaze. It wasn't just the fire of competition. There was something else, something that spoke of understanding. "I thought I was the only one who could take this much punishment," Jackson said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Leary's eyes softened for a fraction of a second before she wiped the smile from her face. "You're a lot tougher than I thought, Commander." "Then let's see who's tougher, Princess." He crouched, preparing himself for another charge. And with that the battle resumed. But this time there was no more arrogance. No more bravado. Just two warriors locked in combat, each fighting for something far deeper than pride. The reckoning ***. The chamber felt charged, as if the very air was thick with the energy of their contest. Every movement, every strike, every block and counter was a testament to the battle between not just two warriors, but two ideologies. The princess, regal and unyielding, a product of her bloodline, fighting for pride and honor. The human commander, fierce and relentless, driven not by title or lineage, but by the sheer will to prove himself. Leary's heart was pounding in her chest, the thrill of the fight consuming her mind. She had faced many adversaries in her life, but none had ever pushed her to the limits of her abilities like Jackson Drake. None had ever made her feel as though every strike, every movement she made could be her last. Jackson was relentless, his every action fluid, unpredictable. He fought like a man who had spent his entire life in battle, someone who didn't fear the consequences of failure, who didn't care about the grand schemes or royal titles. His goal was simple, to survive and to claim victory. Leary was no stranger to hard combat, but she had always been the one in control, the one who dictated the pace of the battle. She had always been the one to dictate the terms. But now, facing Jackson, she realized that she could no longer rely solely on her strength, her speed, her gauntlet. Her thoughts flickered back to her father's words earlier that day about the kingdom, about alliances and the future. She couldn't be weak. Not now, but as Jackson's next attack came at her with lightning speed, Leary realized that she wasn't afraid of weakness. She was afraid of being alone. Afraid of being trapped in the expectations of others, afraid of a life lived for duty rather than passion. Jackson's raw determination, his refusal to be anything less than himself, was unlike any she had ever encountered. Jackson was closing in on her again. His hands were fast, his body moving like a machine, every strike an intricate part of a deadly dance. She blocked one punch then another, but his third punch came too quickly. The force of his blow sent her stumbling back, her balance faltering for just a split second. That was all he needed. Jackson surged forward, his arms sweeping low to take her legs out from under her. Leary didn't have time to react as she hit the floor with a resounding thud. Pain radiated up her spine, but she was already rolling, spinning onto her feet in a fluid motion. She couldn't let him have the upper hand. She wouldn't. With a quick, fluid motion, she drew her blade from its sheath, the energy of the sword humming in her hand. It was a weapon forged by her ancestors, an ancient symbol of her royal lineage. As she leveled the blade at Jackson, the air seemed to hum with power, a subtle reminder of the untold strength that flowed through her veins. This was her weapon, her heritage. But Jackson didn't hesitate. Instead of recoiling in fear, his eyes flashed with a fierce, burning intensity. "You think a blade will scare me, princess?" he taunted. "I've fought with everything I've had and I'll fight you the same way, weapon or no weapon." Leary's heart raced. She hadn't expected this. She thought the sight of her blade would intimidate him as it had so many others. But Jackson wasn't like the others. He didn't care for status or royal trappings. His only concern was proving that he could face her without faltering. The princess stepped forward, her movements smooth and calculated. She slashed the air with her sword, a flash of energy trailing behind the blade as it moved with a deadly arc. Jackson sidestepped, his eyes never leaving hers as he moved with surprising speed, ducking under her strike and coming up in a swift motion to grab her wrist. His hand locked around her forearm like a vice, stopping her blade from cutting any deeper. For a moment they stood there locked in a battle of wills. Leary's violet eyes met Jackson's blue ones, the intensity of their clash reaching a fever pitch. She could feel his grip tightening, but she also sensed something else, something different. It wasn't just the strength in his body. It was the resolve in his soul. Jackson wasn't here to fight for glory or for the approval of others. He was fighting for himself, for the right to stand beside her as an equal. Leary's breath caught in her chest. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to feel this sense of connection in the midst of their battle. But she could see it now, in the way he held her gaze, the way he refused to back down. There was something about Jackson that drew her in, something in the way he fought with every ounce of his being, something that awakened a part of her she had long buried. For the first time, Leary lowered her blade, her grip on the hilt loosening slightly. Jackson's hand slipped from her arm and she took a step back, assessing him. The room was heavy with their shared energy, their breaths coming in short gasps. Jackson, sensing the shift, didn't press the advantage. Instead, he stood his ground, eyes still locked on hers. "I told you, princess. I'm not here for your throne. I'm here to show you that you don't have to fight alone. You don't have to carry the weight of your kingdom on your shoulders by yourself." Leary swallowed hard. The weight of his words settled in her chest, a burden she hadn't known she was carrying until now. She had always been the leader, the protector, the one who carried the expectations of her people. She had never allowed herself to lean on anyone, not even her closest allies, and certainly not the countless suitors who had come to her seeking her hand. They had all wanted something from her, but none had ever truly seen her. And here, standing before her, was a man, no, a warrior, who wasn't asking for anything at all. He wasn't interested in her title, her power, or her kingdom. He just wanted to fight beside her, to show her that there was strength in unity. "You don't understand," Leary whispered, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "I can't afford to be weak. Not now. Not when the future of my people is at stake." Jackson took a step closer, his expression softening for the first time. "You're not weak, Leary. You're stronger than anyone I've ever faced. But strength doesn't mean doing everything alone. Sometimes it's about knowing when to trust someone else." Leary's breath caught in her throat, the words hitting her harder than any blow she had taken in battle. She was used to being alone, had grown up with the expectation that she would have to carry the weight of her kingdom on her shoulders. But here was Jackson, telling her something she had never allowed herself to consider, that she didn't have to do it alone. The room fell silent once again, the tension hanging heavy between them. Leary glanced at the blade in her hand, the weight of it no longer feeling as light as it once had. Slowly, she lowered the sword, the energy crackling from the blade dissipating into the air. She took a deep breath, her heart still racing, but a new thought emerging in her mind. For the first time in years, Leary didn't feel like she was just a princess. She didn't feel like she was carrying the burden of the galaxy on her shoulders. In this moment, with Jackson standing before her, she felt free. "I don't need a king, Jackson," she said softly, her voice steady. "But perhaps I could use a partner." Jackson's eyes softened, the fire in them dimming for a moment. "I'm not here to be your partner for politics, princess. But if you'll let me, I'll be here for you. When the battles are over, when the weight is too much to bear, I'll be there." Leary took a long, steady breath. She wasn't sure what would come of this strange bond they had formed in the heat of combat, but for the first time she didn't need to have all the answers. She was no longer afraid of what the future held. Because in that moment, standing side by side with Jackson Drake, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. Shifting alliances ***. The weeks that followed their confrontation were a blur of emotions, uncertainties, and shifting allegiances. Though Leary had lowered her blade in acceptance of Jackson's words, there was no simple resolution to the conflict in her heart. Her people, her kingdom, her lineage, everything she had been raised to protect, to prioritize, remained a heavy weight on her shoulders. And yet, standing beside Jackson, the tension began to loosen. Perhaps it was the quiet moments between the battles, the moments where Jackson didn't demand anything of her. He had become her confidant, her steadfast companion in ways she hadn't expected. The Verosian Palace, usually an oasis of calm in the midst of political turbulence, had grown tense in the wake of Jackson's arrival. The news of a human warrior taking down her elite guard had spread like wildfire, reaching the highest echelons of power across the galaxy. Whispers filled the halls, rumors twisted into stories of his boldness, his strength, and the unshakable connection between him and the Princess of Veros. There were murmurs of his impending status. Some spoke of him as a suitor, others as a dangerous influence on the princess. The Council of Veros, once calm and composed, was now divided. Some sought to use Jackson for their own political advantage, while others viewed him as a threat to the royal bloodline itself. Leary had seen the subtle shifts, the calculating glances exchanged behind closed doors. Even her closest advisors, the ones who had stood by her since childhood, now questioned her decisions. Some were concerned about her growing attachment to Jackson. Others feared that she had become distracted from her duties. "You cannot afford this distraction, Princess," her chief advisor, Admiral Vallis, said one evening as they stood in the royal gardens, his voice tight with concern. "Your people need you to focus on their future, not on a human warrior whose loyalties are unclear." Leary's eyes narrowed, her fingers tightening around the delicate flowers she had been tending. "I am focused on the future, Admiral. And Jackson is a part of that future. He has shown me a different way to lead, one that does not rely solely on bloodlines and titles." Vallis was silent for a moment, the tension in his jaw betraying his frustration. "You are speaking of something dangerous, Princess. Your alliances with the humans are fragile at best. Their loyalty is always in question." Leary took a deep breath, her gaze lingering on the stars above. "Perhaps, but I have seen enough to know that my people are not the only ones worthy of consideration. The galaxy is changing. We must adapt or perish." The Admiral's eyes darkened, but he held his tongue. He had been loyal to her family for years, and the idea of the princess being swayed by someone so unpredictable troubled him deeply. He bowed, but there was a subtle tension in his movements. "I hope you know what you are doing, Your Highness." As he walked away, Leary was left alone with her thoughts. She had once thought of herself as strong, unyielding, a leader above reproach. But now, in the quiet moments when she found herself alone, she began to wonder if the path she was walking was truly the one she was meant to take. Jackson's presence in her life was both a comfort and a challenge. He didn't play by the rules. He didn't seek her approval or bow to her status. He didn't call her princess with the reverence that others did. He called her by name as an equal, and that had been the first spark of something new in her life. The walls she had built around herself were crumbling, piece by piece, with each passing day spent by his side. And yet, as much as Jackson had shown her that there was more to strength than power and titles, the world she was born into was not one that could simply be ignored. It was a world of power struggles, of alliances, of politics that stretched across light years. To accept Jackson, to stand by him in full, would mean defying everything she had been raised to believe. It would mean defying her people, her father's legacy, and the path her family had carved for her. And still she found herself drawn to him. Jackson wasn't perfect. He wasn't some noble knight or warrior prince, bound by tradition and duty. But he had something that no one else had. He had conviction. He was driven by the desire to do what was right, even if it meant going against everything he knew. His belief that the universe could be more than just a system of power and control resonated with her in ways she hadn't expected. It was during one of their many clandestine meetings in the palace's secluded training hall that Leary finally confronted him about it. "I don't understand," she said as she swung a sparring sword at him, her voice edged with frustration. "Why do you care so much about me? About this kingdom? About my people? You're human. You don't have to fight this fight." Jackson blocked her strike easily, his stance steady. His blue eyes were calm, his expression unreadable. "Because I believe in what you're doing, Leary. You're not just fighting for Varos. You're fighting for something bigger. You want to show the galaxy that there's another way. That strength isn't just in power, in war, in keeping people in line. It's in trust, in unity. You've seen the fractures just like I have. And I think you want to do something about them." Leary paused, the weight of his words settling in her chest. She had never considered it like that. She had always seen her role as protector, as the one who would defend her kingdom no matter what. But Jackson's words, so simple yet profound, made her question everything she had ever known. "I don't know how to do that," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "I've spent my whole life thinking I had to protect everyone. That I had to be perfect." "You don't have to be perfect," Jackson replied, his voice soft but firm. "You just have to be real. And that's enough." It was then that something in Leary shifted. Maybe it was the way his words echoed in her mind, or the way he always stood beside her, unwavering. But for the first time in a long while, she realized that she didn't have to shoulder everything alone. But the challenge was far from over. The political climate surrounding her was becoming more volatile by the day. The council's whispers had only grown louder, and now there were factions within her own court who were openly questioning her decisions. They feared that her closeness to Jackson was a sign of weakness, a betrayal of their proud traditions. Some spoke of marriage alliances, others suggested that her focus on human politics was clouding her judgment. Her father, King Theron, had always been a steady hand at the helm of Varosian power. But now, in his declining health, the kingdom was fractured. He had grown quiet, his once commanding presence now reduced to whispers and shadowed halls. As the time for his succession grew nearer, so did the pressure on Leary to solidify her rule, to restore order to a galaxy on the edge of war. But the more she considered it, the more Leary knew that she could not rely on the traditional ways. The council wanted her to choose a suitor, a partner who would help stabilize the kingdom. But that was not the future she wanted, not the future she needed. "I'm not going to marry some noble for the sake of power," she said to herself one evening, staring out at the stars from her balcony. "I won't." But with those words, she knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. She was no longer just a princess. She was a leader, one who had to break the old rules to forge a new path. A path that would require alliances she had never considered, sacrifices she hadn't yet made, and trust in those who had no right to ask for it. Jackson was not just a warrior at her side. He was the catalyst for change, the spark that would ignite a revolution. But now, with her father's health deteriorating and the council growing more restless, Leary realized the true weight of the decisions that lay ahead. The fight for the future of Varos had only just begun. And this time it would not be won with the blade alone. The storm brews ***. The tension in the Varosian palace reached a fever pitch as the whispers grew louder and more insistent. The council had been unsettled by Leary's unconventional alliance with Jackson, but it was no longer just idle chatter. The nobles, whose power had always been rooted in tradition and bloodline, were growing increasingly restless. The human warrior was seen not as a potential ally, but as a threat, a symbol of the changing order of the galaxy, a challenge to their carefully constructed world. In the weeks since their confrontation, Leary had tried to maintain a delicate balance. She spent long hours in the royal chambers, poring over the state of her kingdom, meeting with advisors and preparing for the inevitable power struggles that would come once her father, King Theron, passed. His health had been deteriorating rapidly, and his once commanding presence had faded into a shadow of its former self. Leary had taken on more responsibility than ever before, her hands guiding the fate of a kingdom that could collapse at any moment under the weight of internal strife. Jackson had remained by her side, a steady presence in the midst of the chaos. His fierce loyalty was something she had come to rely on, but even he knew that the storm was coming. The nobles, the council, the military, they would not stand idly by as Leary challenged their centuries-old traditions. Her decision to embrace change, to look to alliances outside the royal bloodlines, was a challenge to everything they stood for. The day it all came to a head began like any other, with Leary standing before a council of advisors, listening to their concerns. The room was tense, filled with old faces that had been present during her father's reign. They were the ones who had guided him, and now they looked to her. They had expected a smooth transition of power, one that followed the old ways. But Lyri was different. She was unpredictable, a wild card in their carefully ordered game. "Your Highness," began Lord Vrel, the eldest member of the council, his voice heavy with authority. "We cannot ignore the growing influence of the humans in our affairs. Your alliance with Commander Jackson is troubling. It threatens the stability of this kingdom." Lyri stood, her posture regal, but her eyes burned with a quiet fire. She had heard this argument before, and it no longer rattled her. "I am well aware of the human presence in Varos, Lord Vrel. And I am equally aware of the threats to our kingdom. But we cannot afford to remain insular, to isolate ourselves from the larger galaxy. The old ways are crumbling. The galaxy is changing, and we must change with it. And you think this alliance with a human warrior will ensure the future of our people?" Lord Vrel scoffed. "You are the heir to the throne, Princess. Your duty is to protect the legacy of your ancestors. To protect your people. Not to seek partnerships with those who do not share our heritage." Lyri's eyes flashed. "I protect my people by ensuring their survival. By adapting to the times. And Jackson has proven time and again that he is more than capable of standing by me in this fight." A murmur rippled through the room. Some of the council members exchanged skeptical glances, while others leaned forward, their expressions more curious. Lord Vrel's scowl deepened, but before he could respond, Admiral Valis, Lyri's trusted advisor, interjected. "Your Highness," Valis said, his voice low and steady. "Perhaps we should consider other options. There are political marriages available that could strengthen our position, ensure the stability of the kingdom, and solidify our alliances. The humans may be a passing influence, but our own people, the nobility, are the backbone of Varos." Lyri's chest tightened at the mention of marriage. It was a topic she had been avoiding for some time, but it had become an inevitable question. The council was desperate to find a suitor who could help stabilize the kingdom. It was what they had always done: arranged marriages between royal families, alliances forged through blood and title. It was what was expected of her. But the thought of giving up her autonomy, of being forced into a political marriage for the sake of tradition, filled her with a sense of dread. She had already fought against that very idea by accepting Jackson's presence. To go back to that would be a betrayal of everything she had come to believe in. "I will not marry for political gain, Admiral," she said firmly. "Not when I can build true alliances, based on trust and mutual respect." The room fell silent. It was a bold statement, one that challenged the very foundations of Varosian politics. And yet, in that moment, Lyri felt a sense of clarity. She knew that the future of her kingdom didn't lie in the hands of a marriage contract. It lay in the strength of the alliances she could form, in the unity she could bring to those who were willing to fight for a new way. But even as she spoke those words, she knew that the storm was already upon them. The council would not back down. They had their own plans, plans that didn't include Jackson or anyone who wasn't born of Varosian blood. And those plans would not wait for her to decide on a new path. That evening, as Lyri stood alone in the royal gardens, contemplating the weight of her decisions, she was joined by Jackson. He had been distant the past few days, aware of the growing tension in the palace, but he had never once faltered in his support. He stood beside her now, his presence a quiet comfort in the midst of her turmoil. "They're going to force my hand," Lyri said, her voice tinged with frustration. "The council won't stand for it. They want me to choose a suitor to solidify our position through marriage. They don't care about what I believe, or what I fought for." Jackson's eyes softened, his expression a mix of concern and resolve. "Then we fight. Together. We face this storm head-on. You're not alone, Lyri." She looked at him, a fierce determination growing within her. She had always prided herself on being a leader, on making the difficult decisions that others wouldn't. But now she realized that leadership wasn't just about making decisions in a vacuum. It was about taking those decisions and standing firm in them, even when the weight of the world seemed too much to bear. "I won't back down," she said, her voice firm. "I won't let them dictate my future. I'll fight for what I believe in, and I'll fight for a future that doesn't rely on bloodlines or marriage contracts." Jackson nodded, his expression resolute. "And I'll stand with you. Every step of the way." As the days wore on, the political climate in Varos grew ever more strained. The council convened again, this time with more urgency. The pressure on Lyri to make a decision was palpable. But instead of yielding to their demands, she took a bold step, one that would shape the future of her kingdom and the galaxy. Lyri called for a grand meeting, one that would bring together not just the council, but all of the factions that had been vying for power within the kingdom. It was a risk, one that could easily backfire, but it was the only way to move forward. She knew that if she were to bring about the change she desired, she needed to stand before them all and show them that she was not a princess bound by tradition. She was a leader, unafraid to chart a new course. When the day of the meeting arrived, the chamber was filled with the most powerful figures in Varos, each with their own agendas, their own ambitions. And at the center of it all stood Lyri, the princess who was no longer just a pawn in their game of politics. "I will no longer be a prisoner of the past," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of the room. "The galaxy is changing. Varos must change with it. And if you cannot see that, then you will be left behind." The room was silent, each council member watching her intently. And in that silence, Lyri knew that the storm was no longer just a threat. It had arrived. And she was ready to face it head-on. The winds of change ***. The chamber was filled with a heavy silence, the weight of Lyri's words hanging in the air like a tangible force. The nobles, military leaders and council members, those who had once controlled the fate of Varos with their calculated alliances and political maneuvering, now found themselves at a crossroads. For the first time in their lives, they were confronted not with a princess who adhered to the rules, but with a leader who was willing to break them. Lyri stood tall at the center of the room, her posture unwavering. She could feel the eyes of the council members drilling into her, each one trying to gauge her next move. They had expected her to give in, to fall in line with their demands, but she had shown them a different path. This was no longer about a kingdom bound by tradition. This was about the future of Varos, and she was determined to shape it on her own terms. "We have spent centuries clinging to a vision of the future that is no longer viable," Lyri continued, her voice steady but filled with an undeniable force. "We have placed too much value on bloodlines and titles, too much value on control. But we live in a galaxy where power is shifting, where strength is no longer measured by one's heritage, but by one's ability to adapt, to form true alliances." A murmur rippled through the room, but Lyri pressed on, her eyes locking with the faces of the council members. "I will not be a pawn in your games of power. The human warriors, the mercenaries, the allies I choose, they are not a threat. They are an opportunity. But if you cannot see that, if you cannot accept that we must change, then you have no place in this future." Her words echoed through the chamber, and for a moment she thought she could hear the sound of her heart beating in her ears, the tension thick in the air. She was daring them, pushing them to make a choice. Would they stand with her or against her? It was Admiral Valis who finally spoke, his voice tinged with a quiet bitterness. "You would turn your back on us, princess? On the blood of your ancestors? We have fought wars to maintain this kingdom, to protect its legacy. And now you seek to abandon it for, what? For the sake of these human interlopers?" Lyri's gaze never wavered. "I am not abandoning my people, Admiral. I am giving them a future they never thought possible. The galaxy is not static, it is evolving. And Varos will either evolve with it or be left behind." The room fell silent again, the tension palpable. Lord Vrel, the eldest of the council members, leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. "And you believe that this human warrior, Jackson, will help us accomplish this grand vision of yours? You've blinded yourself with idealism, princess. You cannot lead a kingdom on dreams alone." Lyri's chest tightened at the mention of Jackson, but she stood her ground. "Jackson is not just a human warrior, Lord Vrel. He is someone who has shown me that strength comes not from birthright or military power, but from the ability to inspire others to stand together, to fight for something greater than themselves. He has proven himself time and time again, and I trust him, just as I trust the people who are loyal to me. Loyalty is earned, not inherited." She glanced to her side where Jackson stood, his presence unwavering. His eyes, usually calm and steady, now gleamed with a quiet intensity, as if he knew that this moment would change everything. She could feel the weight of his silent support, the certainty that he would stand by her no matter what. The council members exchanged glances, their faces a mix of disbelief, suspicion and grudging respect. The idea of abandoning their centuries-old traditions for something as uncertain as this was a bitter pill to swallow. But there was no denying that Lyri's resolve had shaken them. The young princess, once so obedient, so willing to follow the rules, had grown into something far more dangerous. A true leader willing to challenge the old order to create a better future. Lord Vrel opened his mouth to speak again, but the sound of a door opening interrupted him. A figure stepped into the room, King Theron. The king, once a towering presence in Varosian politics, now seemed frail and diminished. His once vibrant eyes were dull, and his movements were slow, as if every step was a struggle. But there was still a fire in him, a remnant of the leader he had once been. He shuffled forward, supported by 2 attendants, and his eyes met Leary's. "I've been listening," King Theron said, his voice hoarse but clear. "And I have heard enough." The room went silent, all eyes turning to the king. Leary's heart skipped a beat. Her father had been absent from most of the political debates, his health deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated. Many had thought he was too weak to intervene, too frail to exert any influence. But now, standing before them all, he seemed to draw on some final reserve of strength. "I may not have the strength I once did," the king continued, his gaze sharp despite his weakened state. "But I have lived long enough to see the changes in this galaxy. I have seen the power of alliances, the rise of new forces that we cannot ignore. And I have seen my daughter grow into a woman capable of leading, of making decisions that I, myself, was too afraid to make." Leary's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and sorrow. She had always known that her father had been bound by duty, by the expectations of those who had come before him. But hearing him acknowledge her strength was a validation she had never expected. King Theron turned his gaze to the council. "You have all served me well and I value your loyalty. But I will not live forever. And when I am gone, it will be Leary who leads this kingdom, not because of her bloodline, but because she has earned it. She has earned the trust of her people, and she has earned the trust of those who would stand by her." There was a long pause, and then the weight of his words seemed to settle over the room. It was as if the old guard, the council members who had clung to tradition for so long, finally realized that they were no longer in control. The future of Varos and the galaxy was no longer in their hands. Lord Vrel's face twisted in anger, but there was a reluctant acknowledgement in his eyes. He knew that the game had changed. The age of bloodlines and ancient power was over. "You are not alone in this, Leary," the king continued. "I may be old, but I will give you what strength I have left. The kingdom will follow you if you show them the way." Leary blinked, her emotions swirling in a maelstrom. This was the moment she had dreamed of, the moment when she could finally step into the role she had always been meant to play. But it was also a moment of great responsibility. Her father's support was a gift, but it was also a burden. The room fell silent again, and this time it was Jackson who spoke. His voice was quiet but firm, carrying the weight of someone who had seen more battles than he cared to remember. "Varos can't be rebuilt on old ways alone. It needs new blood, new ideas. It needs leaders who are willing to change." Leary nodded, her gaze steady. "And it will be rebuilt with the strength of my people, the trust of my allies, and the wisdom of those who truly understand what it means to lead." In that moment, Leary knew that the storm she had faced had not been a battle for survival. It had been the beginning of a new era. The winds of change were no longer just a whisper in the distance. They were here and they were unstoppable. The council had been forced to acknowledge the truth. The old ways were gone, and with them, the shackles that had held Varos in place for so long. The future was hers to shape. And as Leary stood before the council, her father by her side and Jackson at her back, she knew that nothing could stand in her way. The galaxy was changing and she would be the one to lead it. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.